Today it's all about fire, flames, noise, and the moment when Europe tries to launch itself back into orbit. Because at the time this script is being written, in January, Europe is once again standing at a launch pad. With a rocket, a startup, and a question that's bigger than European Space Agency Aerospace itself. Can Europe still do it? Tonight at 9 p.m., Central European Time, the Spectrum from European Space Agency Aerospace was supposed to launch on its second flight. The first launch window, the second attempt, the moment when hope either turns into momentum or just another footnote. Already at noon, the announcement came. Launch postponed. New date will be announced in due time. If you're seeing this, you likely know more than I do right now. Maybe it has flown, maybe not, maybe it's lying in the sea, maybe Europe has just given birth to a new launcher. If the launch hasn't happened yet, of course we'll stream it live. The link is down in the description. Regardless of the outcome, the very fact this flight is happening is significant. It's a signal. Because this launch is more than just the second test of a Munich startup, it's a test for something much bigger, for Europe's ability to have independent access to space again. Let's skip the institutional rockets Ariane and Vega for now. The first Spectrum flight in March ended after a few seconds with loss of control. Crash, end of story. In spaceflight, it's not a big deal, but in Europe, it still always feels like one. Because for decades, Europe has gotten used to treating spaceflight like an infrastructure project. Slow, cautious, and politically perfect? Or not at all? Of course, that brings many advantages and disadvantages. European Space Agency Aerospace is the opposite of that. It's a startup with an iterative approach. Build, fly, learn, repeat.
Like SPACX Rocket Lab or Firefly have done.
And that's exactly why not only the space community is watching this launch, but also politicians, the military, and of course the European Space Agency. Just a few weeks before this launch, at the end of November 2025, Europe met in Bremen for the European Space Agency Council of Ministers Conference. That's the moment when it's decided what Europe wants to do in space and what it's willing to pay for it. And the result was historic. 22.1 billion euros for the next 3 years, the largest budget in European Space Agency's history. Still, that amounts to about 15 euros per citizen per year, less than a streaming subscription, for climate monitoring, navigation, security, science, and access to space. And it's exactly this last point that's crucial. Because what good is the best Earth observation system, the best navigation satellites, the best military reconnaissance, and the best climate research if you can't launch them yourself? Sure, we have the Ariane and the Vega, but they're not designed to be fast and cheap. They're meant for institutional customers. The war in Ukraine has made that brutally clear. Modern power projection begins in orbit. Recon, comms, navigation, coordination. Space travel is no longer just science, it's infrastructure. An infrastructure that you don't control yourself doesn't belong to you. European Space Agency has understood this, which is why there are programs today like the European Launcher Challenge. And that's why European Space Agency doesn't want to develop the next launcher itself anymore, but instead act as an anchor customer and let industry deliver, just like National Aeronautics and Space Administration did 15 years ago. That's a paradigm shift. And European Space Agency Aerospace is one of the first real practical tests of this new model. The second Spectrum flight doesn't decide whether European Space Agency is good or bad, but it does make a decision. Can Europe learn again to build rockets like a learning system? Not perfect or political, but iterative. Test, fly, fail, improve, repeat, just like the Americans have been doing for 20 years. You really don't have to copy everything they do, but they've definitely mastered that. And that's exactly why today we're not just talking about European Space Agency, but about the European Space Agency strategy. The new role of spaceflight in Europe's security policy, the status of European micro-launchers, and the comparison with Rocket Lab and Firefly. Today we're going to look at whether Europe is learning how to launch again. My name is Serwin, and this is Mars Chronicles. If you had to reduce the speech by European Space Agency Director General Joseph Aschbacher at the Ministerial Council to a single sentence, it would probably be this one. In space, to stand still is to fall behind. Standing still means falling behind, and that wasn't a metaphor, that was a diagnosis.
Because what Aschbacher did there in Bremen wasn't a budget speech. It was a strategic assessment of Europe's position in a world that is currently being reshuffled.
He basically says three things. Space travel is no longer just science. It is climate, security, economy, and geopolitics all at once.
Secondly, Europe is not poor, but Europe is strategically underinvested. The United States accounts for less than 20% of the world economy, but over 60% of global space spending comes from the United States. Europe accounts for about 24% of the world economy, but invests only about 10% of the global space budgets. And third, if Europe does not gain independent capability for space access, reconnaissance, navigation, communication, and transportation, then in the future, it won't be sitting at the table, but will be on the menu. This isn't alarmism, it's the lesson from Ukraine. Joseph Aschbacher says it openly. The war in Ukraine began a day before the invasion in space.
Satellite reconnaissance, communication, navigation, and situational awareness. Modern warfare no longer works without space technology.
And that's exactly why he calls it a perfect storm. Climate crisis, security crisis, geopolitical crisis, economic pressure, all at the same time. And that's exactly why space technology is no longer just a matter of prestige, it's infrastructure. And now we come to the critical point for Europe. Independent access to space. Because what good is the best Earth observation system, the best navigation satellites, the best military reconnaissance, or climate modeling if you can't reliably launch them yourself? Ariane 6 and Vega C are meant to do just that. But Aschbacher says something even more important in his speech. European Space Agency will no longer develop the next launcher itself. Europe is quietly saying goodbye to an old model. We build a rocket no matter what it costs, and move towards buying launches and letting industry deliver them. What does all this actually mean in concrete terms? The development of the Ariane 6 has consumed 4 to 5 billion euros depending on how you count, and the budget for the European Launcher Challenge is around 900 million euros. This approach supports multiple companies simultaneously. Not a perfect rocket, but an ecosystem. More risk, more iteration, more competition, more learning curve, and that's exactly where they come into play.
European Space Agency Aerospace, Rocket Factory Augsburg, PLD Space, Orbex, and Maya Space. European Space Agency is currently the most prominent representative of this new generation.
The first Spectrum flight was lost in March, but for a first launch, that was already quite solid. They left the launch pad without damaging it. If they don't repeat the mistake, then they're on a very good path. And that wasn't a success, but it also wasn't a historic failure. The first flight is still part of the development work. Almost every new rocket fails the first time. Falcon 1 needed 4 attempts, Electron had massive initial problems, Firefly exploded on its maiden flight, and even the Ariane 5 lost its maiden flight. What matters is not the first launch. What matters is whether you're allowed to iterate. And that's exactly what's happening now. That's why the second Spectrum flight is more strategically important than the first. Because what's at stake here is not whether we can build rockets, but whether Europe can learn again to develop rockets like software. At the same time, Rocket Factory Augsburg is technically a bit more conservative, more industry-driven, with more traditional production logistics. During preparations for the first flight in 2024, there was an explosion, but no one was injured. But since then, reconstruction, delays, rebuilding. The pattern is the same for both. It's not a lack of engineering skill, but a lack of flight cycles. Europe has forgotten that rocket development is not a tender project, but a learning system.
Then there's PLD Space from Spain with Miura 5. After suborbital successes, they're on their way to orbit.
Orbex in Great Britain with Prime is strongly focused on sustainability, and Maya Space in France is the Ariane Group spin-off for New Space Light Launcher. They all face the same issue. Not enough launches, limited iteration, and excessive politics. Europe is currently building 5 or 6 rockets, but none of them fly often enough, at least not yet, and that's about to change quickly. Let's take a quick look across the Atlantic. First, there's Rocket Lab, of course. Their Electron rocket flies routinely, and has already completed dozens of successful launches. They have a production line, reuse experiments, and the Neutron in development, which is set to debut this year.
In the description below, you'll find a video about the Neutron. Then there's Firefly.
Their Alpha is now in regular operation after a failed launch, flying for the United States military and National Aeronautics and Space Administration.
They also landed Blue Ghost on the moon and are developing a medium launcher with Northrop. What's the difference? Not better engineers, not better physics, but flight rate, experience, and brutal practice. Ashbacker says it very clearly between the lines. Europe can no longer afford perfect programs. Europe needs learning systems. That's why the European Launcher Challenge, anchor customer model, more risk, more iteration, more industry.
Or in his words, 22 billion euros is only 0.03% of the European gross domestic product.
About 15 euros per person is not a luxury, but an insurance. And with that, we are at an exciting point. Europe has the money, the industry, and the engineers. What Europe doesn't have yet is a functioning startup culture in tune with the 21st century. In the end, it all comes down to a single, uncomfortable, but simple truth. Europe doesn't have a technology problem. Europe has a speed problem.
European Space Agency and European industry can send probes to comets, build telescopes that find exoplanets, and map the entire sky. They design rovers that are supposed to drill 2 meters deep into Mars and operate the best navigation system in the world, which works with centimeter accuracy, and much more. What Europe has forgotten is something much more mundane: to treat rockets like products, not like political monuments.
The classic Ariane approach was perfect for another world, for a world where you launch once a year, secure everything beforehand, and consider mistakes as political catastrophes.
In this world, a failed launch means parliamentary inquiry, media crisis, program slowdown, and budget panic. People tend to build things that are overly expensive, complex, and perfect, but that world is gone. Today, those who fly often, learn fast, and embrace failure succeed.
SPACEX lost Falcon 1 4 times before it worked.
Rocket Lab dealt with its initial problems publicly, and Firefly lost its maiden flight spectacularly.
European Space Agency Aerospace, Rocket Factory Augsburg, PLD Space, Orbex, and Maya Space are a stress test for this.
Whether Europe can learn again to live with uncertainty, deal with failures, and improve systems iteratively.
If every failed launch is politically fatal, no one will learn quickly.
The strategic shift is real. Anchor customer model, European launcher, challenge, industry instead of government rockets, competition instead of monopoly. But it is not yet complete.
22 billion euros is a lot politically, but strategically it only means the price of admission. Space travel today is infrastructure, like power grids, ports, and fiber optic cables. And you don't build infrastructure with symbolic politics, fear of mistakes, or vanity projects, but with cycles, speed, and industrial ruthlessness. Because only then do you get routine, trust, cost reduction, and real sovereignty.
Maybe that's the most honest way to end this topic. The question isn't whether Europe can do spaceflight. European Space Agency and European industry have long since proven that.
With Rosetta, Gaia, James Webb Space Telescope, Mars Express, Bepicolombo, Copernicus, and so many other missions. The question is, does Europe want to pursue spaceflight as a power factor or just as a cultural project? Because now is the time to take a stand. The other powers in this new multipolar world order are also positioning themselves right now. It will happen with or without Europe, because spaceflight today means security, economy, infrastructure, and a geopolitical lever, and those who don't launch themselves will end up just tagging along.
European Space Agency Aerospace, RFA Maya Space, and all the others are not a replacement for European Space Agency. They are proof that Europe can learn to move faster again.
European Space Agency remains the architect. Industry must become the engine, and politics needs to stop treating spaceflight like a monument. Because the new race to the moon, into orbit, and to the cislunar economy has already begun. The only open question is Europe sitting in the cockpit or just in the passenger's seat? I'm Serwin, and that was Mars Chronicles. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe, write your opinion in the comments, and tell me, What do you expect from European spaceflight in the next 10 years?
Thanks to all supporters, channel members, and patrons. And as always, per aspera ad astra.
Cut. Margarita.